The wind pushed thin veils of dust across Willow's End as if trying to sweep the little frontier town off the map altogether. Noonlight beat down on the cracked wooden boards of the sheriff's office, making the place look older than it already was. A broken windmill creaked on the northern edge of town, its blades turning lazily, sometimes not turning at all, as though even the wind had grown tired of trying to keep life moving in this forgotten corner of the West. People wandered the street in slow, wary steps, ranchers with sunburnt faces, women carrying buckets of water, children told to stay close to porches. They whispered more than they spoke, and their eyes often drifted to the same man, Sheriff Alden Pike. Alden stepped out of his office the way he always did, quietly, almost apologetically. He didn't swagger like most lawmen, didn't carry the air of someone eager for a fight. His hat sat low over his eyes, shadowing a face carved more by worry than violence. His boots touched the dirt lightly, almost respectfully, as though he feared disturbing the earth itself. He greeted folks with a tilt of the chin, seldom with words. The townspeople nodded back, polite but uncertain, for their sheriff did everything except behave like one. Women whispered from behind their curtains. "He's too soft," one said. Another replied, "Ain't the kind to draw iron, that's for sure." Men muttered on porches about needing someone with a backbone, a fighter, a man who'd stand tall when danger came. But Alden Pike kept to himself, walking the length of Main Street each morning and each evening, like a ghost fulfilling a routine from a previous life. That day, danger didn't just come, it thundered in. 6 horses galloped down the road, their hoofs sending up clouds of red dust. Folks dove out of the way as the Creighton gang rode in, laughing loud enough to chase birds from rooftops. The moment they reined in, every door slammed shut, every store owner turned his sign to closed, and silence dropped heavy across the street. Only the windmill creaked. Brig Creighton, a broad-shouldered brute with a jagged scar carving down his cheek, swung off his horse. "Willow's End," he shouted, his voice thick with mockery. "Where's that sheriff you folks bragged about? The one supposed to keep you safe?" People didn't look to Brig. They looked to Alden, who stood alone beside his office door, his coat fluttering in the dusty breeze. He didn't move, didn't straighten, didn't reach for the revolver resting on his hip. He simply watched, or maybe endured. Brig spotted him and laughed. That him. That quiet little reed swaying in the wind. He sauntered closer, each step leaving deep prints in the dirt. The gang dismounted behind him, fanning out like sharks circling in shallow water. Brig jabbed a thumb toward Alden. "Come on, Sheriff. Say something. Growl at me. Bare your teeth." Alden remained still. A murmur rippled from the townsfolk hiding along the edges of the street. Some shook their heads. Others lowered their eyes. A few whispered prayers. Alden's silence forced the weight of humiliation onto everyone, not just himself. Brig stepped right up to him, so close Alden could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You gonna run us out? Arrest us? Or just stand there like a scarecrow?" Alden's voice came out soft, steady, and almost gentle. "Move along." Brig blinked, then burst into laughter so loud it startled the horses tied up by the hitching post. "Move along. That's cute." He shoved Alden in the chest with both hands. The sheriff stumbled backward but caught himself before falling. Not once did his hand go near his gun. The gang hollered like they'd just watched a circus trick. Brig raised his hands to the crowd. "There he is, folks. Your mighty sheriff. Guardian of justice. Protector of dirt and tumbleweeds." A few townspeople flinched, embarrassed not only for Alden but for themselves. They needed someone strong, a figure to shore up their courage. Instead, all they saw was a man who refused to rise to taunts or challenges. Alden stepped back toward his office door, brushing dust from his coat. He didn't say another word. His calmness, whether born of fear, wisdom, or some burden only he knew, spread through the crowd like cold water dumped over fire. Brig spat at his boots. "We own this town now. Anyone got a problem with that, talk to your sheriff." He tapped Alden's badge with a smirk. "If you can get him to speak." The gang drifted toward the saloon, their laughter echoing long after they pushed through the swinging doors. People began to peek out from behind their hiding spots. Some shook their heads. Others muttered curses. A few children stared at Alden with the wide, disappointed eyes reserved for heroes who failed to live up to the stories. The sheriff turned away, the dust settling on his shoulders like blame. On the far side of the street, beneath the long shadow of an old juniper tree, stood a woman wrapped in a dark shawl. Mave Holloway watched the entire scene without blinking. Her hair was white as desert blossoms, her face lined with the kind of grief one collects from outliving everyone she ever loved. She was the kind of woman whose presence drew silence without effort. As people whispered their frustrations, Mave's eyes remained fixed on Alden. There was no disappointment there, no anger, only recognition, as if she saw a truth hidden from everyone else. When Alden finally glanced her way, her expression didn't change. She merely dipped her head once, a motion so subtle it could have been imagined. The sheriff stiffened slightly, like someone who had been seen when he meant to stay invisible. Then he lowered his gaze and stepped inside his office. Mave turned back toward the dusty horizon, whispering to herself, "The past never stays buried, not in a place like this." The afternoon dragged on with heavy tension, every sound sharper than usual. The clatter of a drop horseshoe seemed like a gunshot. The slosh of a bucket felt like thunder. The broken windmill moaned through the wind, as the warning of the storm just beginning to crawl toward Willow's End. Inside the saloon, the gang's laughter rolled out into the street, reminding everyone that danger had settled in and intended to stay a while. No one walked with confidence. Men double-checked their locks. Women gathered their children close. The town's collective heartbeat felt shaky, uneven, uncertain. People wanted a sheriff who'd stand tall, who'd draw iron in defense of their homes. Instead, they had Alden Pike, who avoided conflict like a man tired of bloodshed, or terrified of creating it. Rumors grew with each passing hour. Some said Alden was a coward who'd taken the job because no one else wanted it. Others whispered he had once drawn his gun and something terrible had come of it, something that stole the fire from him. A few believed he wore the badge out of guilt, not duty. But Mave Holloway knew better. She had seen the look in his eyes when Briggs shoved him, the quiet tightening of a man wrestling with demons. She understood the kind of restraint that could only be born from power, not weakness. She wasn't afraid, but she knew the town would suffer long before Alden Pike stepped into whatever destiny clawed behind his silence. Evening approached, painting the sky in strokes of bronze and purple. Lanterns flickered to life along porches. Dogs paced nervously in the dust. The air tasted of approaching violence. Alden walked the street again, as he always did, but now every gaze he met carried disappointment, frustration, or outright disdain. No one greeted him. No one nodded. They simply watched him pass like a man already half-buried. He reached the end of Main Street and paused near the broken windmill. The rising moon glimmered across its rusted blades. He placed a hand on the worn wood as though steadying himself, taking in a breath that trembled just slightly. "You'll have to stand up eventually," a soft voice murmured behind him. Alden didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. He knew Mave's voice. The saloon changed overnight. Once a place where old-timers played cards under dim lantern light and ranchers shared tired laughter after long days in the sun, it now throbbed with the crude voices of the Creighton gang. Their boots slammed against tables, their fists pounded the bar, their laughter spilled out onto the street like spilled whiskey. They claimed every bottle, every chair, every ounce of peace. The townsfolk stepped around the saloon as though it were a rattlesnake coiled in the center of Willow's End, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. Inside, Brig Creighton leaned across the bar toward the trembling owner, Lyle Mason. "Protection money," he said, tapping a thick finger against the counter. "Weekly. Starting now. You don't pay. You don't drink. You don't breathe." His grin widened, showing teeth stained yellow and sharp as cruelty. Lyle swallowed hard. "Brig, I ain't got it. Not this week." Brig grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into a shelf of bottles. Glass shattered. Whiskey spilled. The gang cheered. Brig's voice became a low growl. "Then make it. Sell your furniture. Sell your horse. Sell your boots for all I care." As Lyle gasped, the doors swung open and Sheriff Alden Pike stood framed in afternoon dust. The saloon quieted at once, not out of fear but out of anticipation. A show was about to begin. The gang loved a show. Alden stepped inside. His hat brim still shadowed his eyes, but his jaw was tight. "That's enough," he said calmly, stepping toward Brig. Brig tilted his head like he'd found a critter worth poking. "Sheriff Pike. Just in time. We were discussing economics with our friend Lyle." Alden approached slowly. "Leave him be." Brig dropped Lyle to the floor and sauntered toward the sheriff. "Or what? You'll stare me to death." He cupped a hand to his ear. "Listen to that silence, boys. Not a single person in this town believes this man can stop us." Alden didn't flinch. But when Brig shoved him, hard, Alden's back at a table, knocking cards and coins across the floor. His hand twitched near his holster, not reaching, just remembering. Brig noticed that tiny movement and laughed. That's all you got. Reflexes of a church mouse. Alden regained his footing, his breath controlled, his eyes steady. This ends now, he said quietly. Brig stepped into his face. No, Sheriff. This begins now. The gang shoved past Alden on their way out, each one bumping him deliberately, laughing as if brushing aside a scarecrow propped in their path. When they were gone, silence filled the saloon again, heavier than before. Lyle wiped a shaking hand across his mouth and whispered, "You have to stop them, Sheriff, or they'll take everything." Alden nodded slowly but offered no promise. He walked out with the weight of the town pressing into his shoulders, the wind swirling dust around his boots like judgment. The gang spread its reign of terror through the surrounding ranches. They cornered families, demanded livestock, took hay from barns, and threatened to burn fields if ranchers refused to pay. They whipped a man for questioning them and stole another's wagon, leaving him stranded miles from home. Fear seeped through Willows and like a slow poison, tightening the town's throat. Each incident pushed Alden further into the shadows of his past. At night, he sat alone in his small office, opening a drawer he kept locked. Inside lay an old, tarnished badge, one he had worn before Willow's End. He ran his fingers over the worn metal, tracing the bullet dent near the star's edge. Beside the badge lay a folded photograph of a younger Alden standing beside two other men, all three proud, dangerous, and unbroken. One of those men was dead now. Another gone without a trace. The third, the one staring at the photograph, carried scars across his ribs and a memory of a duel that had turned him into something he wasn't proud of. Alden closed the drawer sharply, as if shutting the past would erase the ache it left behind. But pain has a way of sticking to a man, especially one who once walked too close to death and survived by an inch of fate. The next morning, as the sun clawed its way above the canyon rim, Alden stepped onto his porch to find Mave Holloway waiting for him. Her shawl fluttered in the wind, her eyes deep with understanding no one else in town possessed. "You can only hide your hands for so long," she said before he spoke. He stiffened. "You saw what happened yesterday." "I saw you let your cell be pushed," she replied. "And I saw more fear in your eyes than anger. You're not weak, Alden. You're haunted." He turned away. "I won't draw again." "Then they'll keep taking until there's nothing left," she said softly. "Including you." Alden didn't answer. Mave stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I know what happened in your past. I know why you fear the gun. But I also know this town needs the men you were, even if you don't." She left him standing alone on the porch, the morning wind whispering through the empty street. Later that day, Alden saddled his horse and rode toward the canyons west of town. The land opened wide, red and golden cliffs rising around him like ancient guardians. The air here felt untouched by the gang's corruption, pure enough to breathe deeply without tasting fear. He stopped in a narrow pass where the shadows lay cool against the rock. From his saddlebag, he pulled an old revolver, not the one he wore at his hip, but one wrapped in a faded cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a weapon polished by time and memory. The metal gleamed like a shard of moonlight. Alden stood still for a moment, letting the canyon's quiet settle into his bones. Then his hand moved. He drew the gun. It felt too natural, too easy, like a memory his muscles refused to forget. He holstered it, drew again, faster. Then again, faster still. Dust swirled around his boots. The canyon echoed with the soft whisper of the leather holster, the click of metal, the metallic thud of instinct resurfacing. Draw. Holster. Draw. He closed his eyes and saw the duel from years ago. The moon falling. The blood. The disbelief in onlookers' faces as they realized the truth. Alden Pike was faster than he wanted to be. Too fast. A killer speed. He had sworn never to use it again. Sworn to choose peace. Sworn to run from his own shadow. But here, in the canyon, he felt that shadow rising, stretching, claiming him. Part of him feared it. Part of him needed it. And part of him understood that Willow's End would fall unless he embraced it. Distant thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from the town far behind him. A gunshot. Then another. The Creighton gang was growing bolder. Alden holstered the gun and breathed deep. The time he had feared was coming. He had tried to outrun violence, but it had chased him into a corner of the world too small to hide in. By the time he rode back toward Willow's End, the sun was sinking behind a ridge, casting long shadows across the land. People stood on porches in clusters, whispering in frightened voices. Children clung to their mothers. Men gathered rifles they weren't sure how to wield. The town was preparing for bloodshed, and Alden Pike felt the truth settle inside him like a stone dropping into deep water. He was preparing too. The day bled into evening with the kind of heat that warped the horizon, turning the world into a boiling mirage. But nothing in Willows End shimmered more dangerously than the tension settling over the town. People had begun to walk with quicker steps, heads lowered, as if afraid the very air might lash out at them. And late that afternoon, fear finally took its darkest shape. Tom Merrin's screams tore through the quiet like a knife through canvas. The Creighton gang dragged him into the dirt outside his own barn, beating him with the butts of their rifles. Dust rose in frantic clouds around the men as Tom curled into himself, trying to shield his ribs from the blows. Brig Creighton towered over him, every strike punctuated with a laugh that chilled the blood of anyone who heard it. "You think you can refuse us?" Brig snarled, kicking Tom in the stomach hard enough to fold him. "You think you can say no to me? To us?" Tom gasped, clutching his side. "I told you. I'll pay next week." Brig brought his boot down on Tom's hand, crunching bone. Tom screamed again, the sound echoing across the open fields. Chickens scattered. Horses reared in their pens. Ranch hands froze on the fence line, fists trembling but helpless. "Next week ain't good enough," one of the gang members shouted. "You pay when we say you pay." Brig lifted his rifle as if preparing to strike again, but this time, something shifted in the air. A quiet voice drifted from behind the dust. "That's enough." The gang turned. Sheriff Alden Pike stood 10 paces away, his boots half sunk in the dirt, his coat staring in the wind like a shadow unfurling. His eyes weren't angry, but something colder, something resolved. Brig spat into the dirt. "Look here, boys." The Scarecrow decided to speak. Alden walked forward, each step steady, measured. "You're done here. Let him go." Brig barked out a laugh, shoulders shaking. "You got spine today, Sheriff. Where'd you find it? Did Mave pray it into you?" Alden didn't blink. He looked at Tom, then back at Brig. "I won't ask again." The ranch hands watching from the fence didn't breathe. Tom Merrin lay silent, barely conscious. Brig stepped forward, lowering the rifle so the barrel pointed at Alden's chest. "One more word, Sheriff, and I'll put you down right next to him." Alden didn't flinch. "I won't let you kill this town." Brig's grin widened. He swung the rifle but forward, aiming for Alden's jaw. Time slowed. The dust seemed to hang in the air, suspended by tension alone. But Alden moved. His hand flashed up, catching Brig's wrist mid-swing. The motion was so quick, so fluid, that the gang members blinked in disbelief before realizing what they'd seen. Brig froze. His eyes widened. "What?" Alden shoved his arm away, the motion filled with the strength of a man who had stopped hiding from himself. "Tom Merrin goes free," he said quietly. Brig stepped back, stunned that the sheriff had even touched him. A silent moment stretched between them, heavy, electric. Then Brig's expression twisted into rage. "Fine," he growled. "You want to play hero. You want to pretend you're a real lawman." He lifted his chin, voice rising like a challenge thrown into the wind. Dawn. Outside the saloon. A murmur rippled through the ranch hands. No one challenged Brig Creighton and lived. The gang members exchanged wicked smiles. Brig jabbed a finger at Alden. "You and me. Quick as draw keeps breathing." Alden didn't answer. His silence was louder than agreement. Brig smirked. "Good. Maybe we'll finally see what you're worth, Sheriff." The gang rode off, leaving Tom Merrin groaning in the dirt and the town trembling in the echo of the challenge. Alden knelt beside the rancher, checking his pulse, whispering assurances. Ranch hands rushed in. They lifted Tom carefully, unsure where the sheriff's carriage had come from or where it would take them. As Alden rode back toward town, the sky dipped into orange and purple, the canyon ridge swallowing the sun like a closing jaw. The shadows stretched long, almost grasping at him as he passed. He dismounted near the sheriff's office, dust swirling at his feet. Mave Holloway stood waiting on the porch. Her shawl fluttered in the strange wind that always came just before a storm. She looked at him with eyes filled not with fear, but with memory. "You stepped in," she said softly. Finally. Alden removed his hat, letting the cooling air brush his face. Tom would have died. Mave nodded. "Yes, but that's not why you stepped in." He looked away. A man can only watch so much. A man can, she replied. But you're not just any man. He tensed at her words. Don't start. She stepped closer. I was there, Alden. The day your name echoed across 3 counties. The day bullets moved slower than your hands. The day you made a legend out of blood and tragedy. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening. I'm not that man anymore. No, she said softly. But tomorrow at dawn, you will need to be. She didn't wait for his reply. She turned and walked away, her silhouette merging with the deepening dusk. Alden stood on the porch for a long time before he finally stepped inside. The room felt colder than usual, the walls closing in with the weight of the coming dawn. He went to the drawer he swore he would never open again. This time, he didn't hesitate. The old revolver lay inside, wrapped in a cloth worn thin by years. He unwrapped it carefully, almost reverently. The weapon gleamed faintly in the lantern light, a silver ghost of its former fame. He sat down at the table and began to clean it. Each motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The smell of oil drifted through the room. The click of metal on metal echoed softly like a quiet heartbeat. His hands moved with the confidence of a man who had once trusted them too much, and feared them even more. At one point, he paused. His reflection stared back from the polished barrel, not the sheriff the town mocked, but a man shaped by scars, choices, and a past he tried to bury under silence. A gust of wind rattled the windows. The desert outside moaned with a restless voice, carrying the promise of dawn and death. Alden tightened a screw on the cylinder, hand steady, too steady. His reflexes hadn't dulled. He hated that they hadn't. Night deepened. Lanterns flickered on porches. Dogs barked uneasily at shadows. Somewhere distant, a coyote cried out, its howl riding the wind like a warning. Alden set the revolver on the table, traced a scar on his forearm, one earned in a duel long ago, and closed his eyes. The town slept fitfully. He didn't sleep at all. He sat by the window, listening to the wind scrape against the walls, watching dust drift through moonlight, and waiting for the sun to rise over the canyon ridge. A quiet man preparing for a storm he could no longer outrun. By the time dawn began to whisper its first pale breath, Alden Pike knew one thing with certainty. The man he feared becoming was the only man who could save Willow's End. Dawn seeped over Willow's End like a thin blade of pale fire, slicing through the last shreds of night. The sky carried the bruised colors of a fading nightmare, lavender, smoke gray, and the faintest trace of gold. The desert wind stirred early, carrying dust that danced in slow, spiraling swirls, as if the earth itself sensed it was about to witness something it had waited years to remember. By the time the sun crested the canyon ridge, the townsfolk had gathered outside the saloon. They stood in uneasy clusters, boots shifting, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the single figure walking down Main Street with the quiet certainty of a man who had stopped running from himself. Sheriff Alden Pike. His coat fluttered behind him, his hat brim low, the silver revolver resting at his hip catching the faintest glint of morning light. His steps were steady, unhurried. He looked neither left nor right, only toward the half-circle of outlaws waiting in front of the saloon steps. Brig Creighton grinned when he saw him. "Look who decided to show," he said, loud enough for the whole town to hear. "Wasn't sure you had the guts to drag yourself out of bed." Alden stopped 10 paces away. The distance between them was thin as a breath, wide as a lifetime. "I'm here," he said simply. Brig raised his chin. "You know the rules, Sheriff. First man to drop loses. And today ain't a day for you to win." The outlaws chuckled, hands hovering near their holsters. Dust drifted across the ground like restless spirits. Alden didn't speak. He didn't need to. Mave Holloway stepped to the front of the crowd, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her face held no fear, no doubt, only the solemn recognition of a truth she had carried alone for years. Brig's grin sharpened. "Any last words, Sheriff?" Alden's gaze didn't waver. "Only this. Leave the townsfolk out of it." Brig spat. "Your hero act stops here." The air thickened. A hush fell so deep even the wind grew still. A tumbleweed rolled between them, scraping softly across the dirt before falling silent. Then Brig moved. His hand shot toward his gun, faster than most men could think, and the gang followed with a roar of metal scraping leather. 6 guns aimed to kill, 6 barrels rising, 6 sets of eyes narrowing. And Alden Pike disappeared. At least, that's how it looked. One heartbeat. One blink. A flash of silver cleaved the morning air, blinding in the newborn sunlight. Thunder exploded across Main Street, not from the gang, but from the sheriff's gun. One shot. Then another. Then a third. Each crack was so sharp it sounded as if the sky itself had split open. Briggs' gun clattered to the ground as he stumbled backward, shock carved across his face. Two of his men cried out and fell, boots twisting in the dust. Others froze, their hands still gripping their holsters but unable to comprehend how they'd been beaten before their weapons had even cleared leather. Alden stood motionless, smoke drifting from the barrel of his revolver. His arm had barely moved. His coat still fluttered from the rush of motion that had seemed less like a draw and more like a blur of silver lightning. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Did you see? He couldn't have. No man moves that fast. Mave stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying the weight of truth. He's always been faster. A murmur swept through the people. What do you mean? Someone asked. Mave looked at Alden with a sorrowed smile. Years ago, they called him the Silver Ghost. Fastest gunslinger alive. Too fast. Too deadly. The kind of speed that turns a good man into a legend, and into someone who fears what he can do. A gasp went up. The name spread through the crowd like wildfire, passing from ear to ear. The Silver Ghost. That was him. My God. Briggs, bleeding and furious, staggered forward. Ghost or not, he snarled, no man kills my boys and walks away. He lifted his gun with his trembling left hand. He never fired. Alden's arm flickered, another silver flash, and Briggs' weapon flew from his grasp, spinning across the ground like a kickstone. The outlaw cried out and dropped to his knees. Alden approached him slowly. Dust curled around his boots. The wind began to rise again, tugging at the edges of the world as if urging the moment onward. Briggs looked up, fury melding into fear. You should have died years ago. Alden's voice was calm, almost compassionate. I tried to put the gun away. I tried to leave that man behind. Briggs trembled. Then why pick it up again? Because you left me no choice. One final, echoing gunshot cracked across the morning sky. Briggs Creighton fell. The last outlaw's breath scattered into the dust as his body hit the ground. Silence swallowed the street. Even the wind paused to listen. Alden holstered his revolver with quiet, fluid ease. The motion practiced, familiar, inevitable. The townspeople stared at him, not with fear but with dawning respect. Men who had once doubted him straightened their shoulders. Women who had whispered about his weakness now nodded with gratitude. Children looked at him as though he had stepped out of the stories told around campfires. Alden Pike, the quiet sheriff. Alden Pike, the man who never boasted, never threatened. Alden Pike, the Silver Ghost reborn. Mave stepped beside him and whispered, "It was always going to come to this." Alden gave a faint nod. "I know." He walked past the fallen bodies, past the shattered pride of the gang, past the crowd that parted in reverent silence. The sun rose higher, painting him in a soft, golden haze as if claiming him as its own. Dust swirled behind him in slow spirals, catching the morning light, rising like ghosts from the earth. His coat billowed gently as he moved, steady, calm, unhurried. He didn't look back. Not at the bodies. Not at the stunned townsfolk. Not at the legend he had just resurrected. He simply walked on as the desert wind gathered itself, sweeping dust over the fallen outlaws, erasing their footprints, burying the violence of dawn beneath the unending breath of the frontier. By the time the wind settled, only one truth lingered in the heart of Willow's End. The sheriff had not failed them. He had saved them faster than their eyes could blink.